Good evening. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight on Truth Report, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the biggest shell games in the energy transition.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Tonight, we have a story that cuts straight to the heart of the climate crisis, the battle over ammonia, the molecule that fertilizes the world's food supply and now sits at the center of a multi-billion-dollar tug-of-war between fossil fuel giants and clean energy advocates.
We're going to break down the real math behind gray, blue, and green ammonia. And I promise you, the numbers tell a story that the oil and gas industry desperately does not want you to hear.
We'll also be looking at how labor exploitation and the vulnerability of migrant workers intersects with the climate crisis in ways that rarely make the headlines. Because the same global systems that exploit people also exploit the planet.
So stay with us, because tonight, we're following the money, following the emissions, and following the trail of broken promises that stretches from the gas fields of Norway to the industrial heartlands of Europe. This is Truth Report, and the truth does not come with a corporate sponsor.
Let's get right into our lead story. Equinor, the Norwegian energy giant formerly known as Statoil, has just pulled the plug on its flagship blue hydrogen project in Groningen, the Netherlands. This was supposed to be the cornerstone of industrial decarbonization in Northern Europe. The project was called H2M, and it had backing from the European Union's Innovation Fund.
And here's the critical detail that CleanTechnica is reporting: this project did not fail because of engineering problems. It did not fail because of public opposition. It failed because there were no customers. Let that sink in. A major blue hydrogen project, backed by EU money, positioned as essential infrastructure for the energy transition, collapsed because the market simply did not materialize.
To understand why this matters, we need to talk about what blue hydrogen actually is. Gray hydrogen is produced from natural gas through a process called steam methane reforming. It's cheap, it's dirty, and it accounts for roughly 96% of all hydrogen produced globally. Blue hydrogen is the same process, but with carbon capture and storage bolted on. The fossil fuel industry has marketed this as a clean alternative.
But here's where the math falls apart, Maya. Study after study has shown that blue hydrogen's climate credentials are, to put it diplomatically, questionable. A landmark Cornell University study found that life-cycle greenhouse gas emissions from blue hydrogen can actually be 20% higher than simply burning natural gas directly. 20% higher. That is not a bridge to clean energy. That is a bridge to nowhere.
The problem is methane leakage. Natural gas is primarily methane, and methane is roughly 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. Every step of the natural gas supply chain, extraction, processing, pipeline transport, leaks methane into the atmosphere. Carbon capture technology on the back end cannot recapture methane that was leaked upstream.
And the carbon capture itself is far from perfect. Even the most optimistic industry projections claim 90% capture rates, but real-world performance has consistently fallen short. The Gorgon carbon capture project in Australia, operated by Chevron, was designed to capture 80% of emissions. In its first 5 years, it captured barely a third. We are talking about technology that consistently overpromises and underdelivers.
This brings us to green hydrogen and green ammonia, and why the economics are shifting faster than the fossil fuel industry can keep up. Green hydrogen is produced by splitting water using renewable electricity through electrolysis. No natural gas. No methane leakage. No carbon capture needed. The only byproduct is oxygen.
5 years ago, the standard industry argument was that green hydrogen was too expensive to compete. And that was true at the time. But the cost of renewable electricity has plummeted. Solar power costs have dropped by over 90% in the last decade. Wind power has followed a similar trajectory. And electrolyzer costs are falling as manufacturing scales up globally.
As CleanTechnica's analysis lays out, the real ammonia math now shows that green ammonia is approaching cost parity with gray ammonia in regions with abundant renewable resources. Countries like Chile, Australia, Morocco, and parts of the Middle East are positioning themselves as green ammonia export hubs. The International Energy Agency projects that green hydrogen costs could fall below $2 per kilogram by 2030 in optimal locations.
Now here's where the power structures come into play. Why is the fossil fuel industry pushing blue hydrogen so aggressively when the economics are turning against it? The answer is simple: stranded assets. The natural gas industry has trillions of dollars invested in extraction infrastructure, pipelines, and processing facilities. Blue hydrogen gives them a story to tell investors and regulators. It lets them argue that existing gas infrastructure has a future in a decarbonized world.
Equinor's H2M project collapsing is a crack in that narrative. When a company that has every incentive to make blue hydrogen work cannot find customers for it, that tells you something profound about where the market is heading. Industrial customers are doing their own math, and they're concluding that betting on blue hydrogen means betting on continued natural gas price volatility and the unproven promise of carbon capture at scale.
Let's talk about ammonia specifically, because this is where the stakes get enormous. Ammonia is not some niche industrial chemical. It is the backbone of global agriculture. The Haber-Bosch process, which synthesizes ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen, is responsible for producing the fertilizer that feeds roughly half the world's population. Without industrial ammonia, we simply cannot feed 8 billion people.
And the production of that ammonia currently accounts for approximately 1.8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. That might sound small, but in absolute terms, it is roughly 500 million tons of CO2 annually. That is more than the entire aviation industry. Decarbonizing ammonia production is not optional if we are serious about meeting Paris Agreement targets.
The ammonia industry is also being eyed as a potential shipping fuel and energy carrier. The International Maritime Organization has set targets to reduce shipping emissions, and ammonia is one of the leading candidates to replace bunker fuel in cargo vessels. Japan and South Korea are investing heavily in ammonia co-firing in power plants as a transition fuel.
But there is a critical distinction here that often gets lost. Burning ammonia as a fuel only makes climate sense if the ammonia itself was produced cleanly. If you burn green ammonia, the life cycle emissions are near zero. If you burn gray ammonia, you have simply moved the emissions from the smokestack to the ammonia plant. You have not solved anything. You have just made the accounting more complicated.
And that is exactly the game that some fossil fuel companies are playing. They propose ammonia as a clean fuel while quietly planning to produce it from natural gas. It is greenwashing at an industrial scale, and it is being subsidized by governments that either do not understand the chemistry or do not want to.
The Equinor story also exposes a deeper problem with how Europe has approached the energy transition. The EU has poured billions into hydrogen strategy, but much of that investment has been hedged between blue and green pathways. Critics argue that every euro spent on blue hydrogen infrastructure is a euro not spent on genuinely clean alternatives. And the H2M collapse suggests those critics may be right.
What we are witnessing is a classic pattern in energy transitions. The incumbent industry tries to capture the transition itself, to ensure that the new energy system still runs through their pipelines and their balance sheets. It happened when the coal industry tried to promote so-called clean coal. It happened when the auto industry fought electric vehicles for decades. And now it is happening with blue hydrogen.
Let's pivot to a story that might seem unconnected at first glance, but actually reveals how the same systems of exploitation that damage our planet also damage the most vulnerable people within it. The South China Morning Post is reporting on the devastating experiences of migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong, and the story of a woman identified as Sunju is a case that should trouble anyone who cares about human dignity.
Sunju, a Nepalese woman who was 34 years old when she arrived in Hong Kong in 2023, came to the city with what she described as a simple dream, to work and build a better life. What she found instead was systematic exploitation. According to the South China Morning Post's reporting, her first employer paid her 30% below the statutory minimum wage, allowed her only 2 hours of sleep per day, and gave her just 3 rest days over a period of 6 months.
Let me repeat those numbers because they are staggering. 2 hours of sleep per day. 3 rest days in 6 months. And she was paid for only 2 of those 6 months of work. This is not an employment dispute. By any reasonable standard, this constitutes forced labor. These are conditions that international labor organizations classify as indicators of human trafficking.
And here is where this connects to our climate coverage, Maya. The global system that allows this kind of labor exploitation is the same system that enables environmental destruction. When we talk about supply chains, whether for fast fashion, electronics, or fossil fuels, the exploitation of workers and the exploitation of natural resources are two sides of the same coin. The countries that send migrant workers abroad are often the same countries most vulnerable to climate change.
Nepal is a perfect example. It is one of the most climate-vulnerable nations on Earth. Rising temperatures are melting Himalayan glaciers that feed the rivers providing water to millions. Climate-driven disasters, floods, landslides, drought, are pushing more and more Nepalis to seek work overseas. Sunju's story is not just about bad employers in Hong Kong. It is about a global economic system that forces people from climate-vulnerable nations into conditions of exploitation.
After 6 months, Sunju was dismissed by her employer. But the structural problems did not end there. Hong Kong's system for foreign domestic helpers has been widely criticized by human rights organizations. Workers are tied to a single employer through a visa system that gives the employer enormous power. If you are fired, you have just 2 weeks to find a new employer or leave the territory. That power imbalance is baked into the legal framework.
And the enforcement of labor protections is inadequate. While Hong Kong has a statutory minimum wage for domestic helpers, currently around 4,870 Hong Kong dollars per month, violations are widespread. Research by organizations like the Mission for Migrant Workers has found that wage theft, excessive working hours, and denial of rest days are common, particularly for workers from South and Southeast Asian countries.
This is a story about power. The same concentration of power that allows fossil fuel companies to delay climate action allows wealthy households and economies to exploit vulnerable migrant workers. Both depend on the same logic, that some people's comfort and profit are worth more than other people's well-being and dignity.
We should also note that Hong Kong is simultaneously positioning itself as a green finance hub. The irony of a city marketing itself as a leader in sustainable development while tolerating systematic exploitation of migrant workers should not be lost on anyone. Sustainability is not just about carbon molecules. It is about whether a system treats people and the planet with basic dignity.
Now, let me bring in our third story briefly, because it illustrates another dimension of this pattern. The South China Morning Post also reports that a 34-year-old chef in Hong Kong was arrested for allegedly spraying an unknown liquid on 3 women near the Tai YMTR station during the Christmas and Lunar New Year holiday periods.
The first incident reportedly occurred on Christmas morning, when a woman crossing a footbridge on May Tin Road felt liquid dripping on her hair and saw a man running away. Police arrested the suspect on suspicion of common assault on January 8. While this may appear to be a straightforward crime story, it speaks to a broader pattern of vulnerability in public spaces, particularly for women.
And when we talk about climate adaptation, building cities that are livable, walkable, and resilient, safety in public spaces is a fundamental component. Women's ability to move freely through urban environments affects everything from transportation patterns to economic participation. Cities that are unsafe push people toward private vehicles, undermine public transit ridership, and reinforce car-dependent development that accelerates emissions.
It is a connection that urban planners and climate advocates are increasingly recognizing. The feminist city movement argues that designing cities for everyone's safety, not just the dominant group, produces better climate outcomes. More people walking, cycling, and using transit means fewer emissions. But people will only use those systems if they feel safe.
So even a story that seems far removed from climate policy reveals, on closer inspection, the interconnected systems that either advance or obstruct climate progress.
Now let's bring all of these threads together, Alex, because the pattern across tonight's stories is unmistakable. We have a fossil fuel giant that cannot find customers for its blue hydrogen project. We have migrant workers being exploited in one of the world's wealthiest cities. And we have women being assaulted in public spaces during holiday celebrations.
The common thread is accountability, or rather, the lack of it. Equinor and the blue hydrogen industry have been allowed to market a technology with deeply questionable climate benefits as a clean solution, consuming public subsidies and policy attention that could have gone to genuinely clean alternatives. The accounting tricks of blue hydrogen, ignoring upstream methane leakage, overstating carbon capture rates, are a form of systemic dishonesty.
The exploitation of workers like Sunju is enabled by legal frameworks that prioritize employer convenience over worker rights. The 2-week rule in Hong Kong, the tied visa system, the inadequate enforcement of minimum wage laws, these are policy choices that governments have made, and they could be unmade tomorrow if there were political will.
And the assaults on women in public spaces reflect a failure to create the safe, accessible urban environments that both human rights and climate action demand. When we design cities around fear rather than freedom, we get worse outcomes for everyone and for the planet.
What connects all of these failures is a willingness to tolerate harm to vulnerable people and to the environment in exchange for short-term economic convenience. Blue hydrogen protects fossil fuel balance sheets. Exploitative labor practices reduce costs for wealthy employers. Unsafe public spaces persist because addressing them requires investment and institutional change.
And this is precisely why climate journalism cannot exist in a vacuum. You cannot honestly cover the energy transition without covering the labor conditions in the supply chain. You cannot cover urban emissions without covering urban safety. You cannot cover industrial decarbonization without following the money and asking who profits from delay.
The good news in tonight's stories, and I want to emphasize this, is that the market is starting to do what policy has been too timid to do. Equinor's blue hydrogen project did not collapse because of regulation. It collapsed because industrial customers looked at the real math and decided that blue hydrogen was not a good bet. The market is beginning to price in the risk that blue hydrogen's climate claims will not survive scrutiny.
Green ammonia projects, meanwhile, are advancing rapidly. ACME Group in India is building what it claims will be the world's first commercial-scale green ammonia plant in Oman. The NEOM project in Saudi Arabia is targeting green hydrogen production at scale. And in Australia, the Asian Renewable Energy Hub is planning to power massive electrolyzer capacity with wind and solar.
These projects face real challenges: financing, permitting, infrastructure build-out, securing offtake agreements. But the trajectory is clear. The cost curves are bending in favor of clean production, and every month that passes makes the blue hydrogen pitch harder to sell.
For workers like Sanju, the path forward requires both stronger legal protections and a broader recognition that climate migration and labor exploitation are linked crises. As climate change displaces more people from vulnerable regions, the pool of desperate workers available for exploitation grows. Solving one problem without addressing the other is not a solution at all.
And for women navigating public spaces, the answer lies in the kind of inclusive urban design that also happens to produce better climate outcomes. Well-lit streets, reliable public transit, active street life, these are not luxuries. They are the infrastructure of both safety and sustainability.
So what can you, our viewers, actually do with this information? First, if you are an investor, look past the marketing. When a company tells you that blue hydrogen is clean energy, ask about methane leakage rates. Ask about real-world carbon capture performance. Do the math yourself.
Second, pay attention to how your government spends climate subsidies. Every dollar or euro that goes to blue hydrogen is a dollar or euro diverted from proven clean alternatives. Hold your elected representatives accountable for where that money goes.
Third, recognize the connections. Climate action, labor rights, and urban safety are not separate issues. They are facets of the same challenge, building a world that works for everyone, not just for the wealthy and the powerful.
And finally, support independent journalism. The stories we covered tonight, the real ammonia math, the exploitation of domestic workers, the safety of public spaces, these are stories that powerful interests would prefer you did not hear. The fossil fuel industry spent decades sowing doubt about climate science. They are now spending billions promoting blue hydrogen as the answer. Someone needs to check the math.
That is what Truth Report is here to do. We follow the money. We check the math. We talk to the people whose stories are not being told. And we do it without corporate sponsors telling us what we can and cannot say.
If this kind of journalism matters to you, subscribe, share this episode, and keep coming back. We will keep doing the work as long as you keep watching.
I'm Alex Truth.
I'm Maya Clarity. And this has been Truth Report. Good night.
Stay informed. Stay critical. And never let anyone tell you that the truth is too complicated for you to understand. It is not. They just do not want you to understand it.
We'll see you next time. Until then, follow the money, question the narrative, and remember, in a world full of spin, truth is the most radical act of all.